My brother handcuffed me at my parents' anniversary, announcing to 50 guests that I was a fraud. He grinned, thinking he'd finally exposed my lies. He didn't realize the federal badge around my neck was real, or that the squad cars outside were actually for him. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The pain in my side was a dull, rhythmic throb, a constant reminder of the 3 cracked ribs I was currently hiding under my dress blues. I shifted in the driver's seat of my rental car, wincing as the stiff fabric of the uniform pressed against the bandages taped tightly to my torso. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady my heart rate. It wasn't the physical pain that had my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. It was the dread pooling in my stomach, a cold, heavy weight that had nothing to do with the mission I had just returned from, and everything to do with the house sitting at the end of the long, gravel driveway in front of me. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked gaunt, the dark circles under my eyes practically bruised purple against my pale skin. I looked like I had been through a war zone, which, technically, I had. Just 48 hours ago, I had been in a debriefing room in a secure facility in Virginia, explaining how an undercover operation regarding a massive arms trafficking ring had gone sideways. I hadn't slept in 2 days. My body was screaming for rest, for a hot shower, for a week of silence. But today was Richard and Mom's 40th wedding anniversary. "Pull it together, Mia," I whispered to the empty car, my voice raspy. "It's just a dinner, just 3 hours. You can survive 3 hours." I hadn't planned on wearing the uniform. I usually kept my military life completely compartmentalized from my family. To them, I was a logistics clerk, a paper pusher who managed inventory for the army. Boring. Safe. Unimpressive. That was the cover story I had maintained for 15 years to protect my clearance and my safety. But my flight had been delayed. My luggage with my civilian formal wear was lost in transit at O'Hare, and I had come straight from a mandatory formal commendation ceremony. I literally had nothing else to wear but my fatigue green casuals or my formal dress blues. For an anniversary party, the blues were the only respectful option. I opened the car door and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The house, my childhood home, was lit up like a beacon. I could hear the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses drifting through the open windows. It should have been a welcoming sound. It should have felt like coming home. Instead, as I walked up the path, I felt a sudden, sharp spike of anxiety, an instinct honed by years of field work telling me that something was wrong. The atmosphere felt charged, volatile. I reached the front door and hesitated, my hand hovering over the brass knob. I took another breath, steeling myself, and pushed the door open. The noise in the foyer died down almost instantly. I stepped inside, forcing a tired smile onto my face. "Happy anniversary," I called out, hoping to bridge the strange gap of silence that had fallen over the room. About 30 people were gathered in the main hallway and living room, a mix of aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. Usually, my arrival would be met with polite, if somewhat indifferent, greetings. I was the absent daughter, the one who missed Christmases because of inventory audits, the one who never had interesting stories to tell. But today, no one smiled back. My Aunt Linda turned away, whispering something furiously to my cousin. An old neighbor, Mr. Henderson, looked at me, then looked down at my uniform with a distinct expression of distaste, shaking his head. And then I saw Richard, my father. He was standing near the staircase, holding a glass of scotch. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slumped. When his eyes met mine, I didn't see the warmth I was desperate for. I didn't see relief that his daughter had made it home safely. I saw disappointment, deep, crushing disappointment. "You actually wore it," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "Mia, I told your mother you wouldn't have the audacity, but here you are." I froze, the pain in my ribs flaring as my muscles tensed. Dad, what are you talking about? My luggage got lost, I didn't have a choice. Stop, he said, holding up a hand. The betrayal in his eyes hit me harder than the shrapnel had 2 days ago. Just stop lying. For one night, Mia, can't you just stop lying? The room spun slightly. I had faced interrogations, high-speed pursuits, and armed hostiles. But this, the sheer toxicity in the air, the collective judgment of the people who were supposed to love me, it was worse than the diagnosis of the injuries I was carrying. It was a different kind of wound, one that no bandage could cover. I stood there in the entryway, the heavy oak door still open behind me, letting in a draft that chilled the sweat on my back. My hand instinctively went to the lapel of my jacket, fingers brushing the texture of the ribbons pinned there. The silver star, the purple heart, the commendations that I had bled for, quite literally. I don't understand, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I closed the door and took a step further into the room, despite every instinct telling me to retreat. Dad, I'm not lying. I came straight from base. Why is everyone looking at me like I committed a crime? Richard turned away, unable to even look at me, which hurt more than if he had screamed. He muttered something to my mother, who was standing beside him, wringing her hands in a nervous, fluttery motion she always did when conflict arose. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, but she didn't step forward to hug me. She stayed planted next to Richard, a unified front against their own daughter. "We know, Mia," a voice sneered from the living room archway. I turned, Derek. My younger brother was leaning against the doorframe, swirling a beer in his hand. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit that was a size too big in the shoulders, and on his hip, clipped to his belt in a way that was both aggressive and tacky, was a folded pocket knife and an oversized ring of keys, artifacts of his job as a mall security supervisor. Beside him stood Thea. She was dressed in a shimmering red gown that was far too flashy for a home anniversary dinner, her hair teased up high. She was looking at me with a predator's grin, her eyes scanning my uniform with a mockery that made my skin crawl. "Hey, Derek," I said, keeping my face neutral. "Happy anniversary to Mom and Dad." Derek pushed off the doorframe and walked toward me, entering my personal space. He smelled of cheap cologne and arrogance. "You've got some nerve," he laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Coming in here playing dress-up. Again." "It's not dress-up, Derek," I said wearily. The pain in my side was becoming a sharp, stabbing sensation. I needed to sit down. "I'm a major in the United States Army, you know this." "I know you're a logistics clerk," Derek corrected, his voice rising so the whole room could hear. "I know you count boxes of MREs in a warehouse in Kentucky, and I know you bought that uniform and those shiny little fake medals online." The room gasped. I saw Aunt Linda cover her mouth. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just the usual sibling bickering. This was a narrative he had been building, a poison he had been dripping into my parents' ears while I was deployed in silence. "Derek," I said, dropping my voice to a dangerous low, "be very careful what you say next." "Or what?" Thea chimed in, stepping up beside him and looping her arm through his. She looked at me with pity that was entirely feigned. "Oh, Mia, honey, we're just embarrassed for you. It's pathetic, really. Trying to outshine your brother just because he's actually out there protecting people." I blinked. "Protecting people? He works at the mall, Thea." "He is in law enforcement," Thea snapped, her veneer cracking for a split second. "He is the head of security. He deals with real criminals. Unlike you, playing soldier." I looked at my parents again. "And you believe this?" I asked Richard. "You believe I would spend 15 years faking a career? Faking this?" I gestured to my uniform. Richard sighed, a sound of heavy resignation. "Derek showed us the website, Mia, the one where you can buy the costume. He explained how people like you do this for attention. Stolen valor, he called it." "Stolen valor," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "We just wanted a nice night," Mom whispered, finally speaking. "Why did you have to ruin it with your fantasies?" I felt a sudden clarity wash over me. The exhaustion receded, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I looked at Derek. He was beaming, his chest puffed out, basking in the validation of the room. He had won. He had successfully turned the narrative so completely that my own reality was being treated as a delusion. But as I looked at him, at his sloppy stance, at the way Thea was whispering in his ear, fueling his ego, I realized they had made a catastrophic error. In their haste to paint me as a fraud, they had forgotten one crucial thing. They assumed I was just Mia, the sister who disappeared for months at a time. They didn't know about the investigation I had been running for the past 6 months. They didn't know that my logistics cover was blown specifically because I was tracking a domestic terror financing ring. And they certainly didn't know that the financing trail had led me to a series of shell companies, one of which was managed by the very security firm Derek worked for. I touched the badge hanging around my neck, hidden beneath the lapel of my jacket. "Okay," I said softly, "you think I'm a fraud. Fine. Admitting it is the first step," Derek smirked. "I'm going to get a glass of water," I said, bypassing him. As I walked past, I leaned in, my voice barely a whisper. "Enjoy your victory lap, Derek. You're going to need the stamina." I made my way to the kitchen, the eyes of the family burning holes in my back. I needed a moment to regroup. I poured a glass of water from the tap, my hand trembling not from fear anymore, but from a simmering rage I was struggling to suppress. I thought about the last 15 years. The missed birthdays were real. The empty seat at Thanksgiving was real, but the reasons weren't what they thought. I wasn't counting boxes. I was in Kandahar, extracting intelligence from high-value targets. I was in Germany, coordinating joint task forces. I had sacrificed a normal life, a marriage, and my own physical health to serve a country that didn't know my name. And I did it while sending money home. That was the kicker. Every month, I sent a check to help out with the house repairs or for Mom's medical bills. I lived on a meager stipend and funneled my hazard pay to them. Derek, on the other hand, had lived in the basement until he was 30. He had failed the police academy entrance exam 3 times, twice on the physical, once on the psych evaluation. I knew this because I had seen his files. He was aggressive, impulsive, and had a problem with authority. But instead of accepting it, he built a fantasy world where he was the protector, the sheepdog, and everyone else was a sheep. And I was just the jealous sister trying to steal his thunder. "Nice costume," a voice dripped with sarcasm from the doorway. It was Thea. She walked into the kitchen, the sequins on her dress catching the fluorescent light. She didn't offer to help. She just leaned against the counter, examining her manicured nails. "You know, you really should have changed," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "Derek is really upset. He was planning to make a toast to Richard, and now everyone is just talking about you and your mental issues." "Is that what we're calling them?" I asked, taking a sip of water. "Mental issues." "Well, what else do you call it when a grown woman plays dress-up?" Thea laughed. She walked closer, lowering her voice. "Look, Mia, we know you're jealous. Derek is going places. He's about to get a huge promotion. He's going to be running security for the entire regional district. He's going to be a big deal." I stared at her. "Regional district? You mean the contract with OmniCorp?" Thea's eyes widened slightly. "How did you know? I mean, yes, exactly. He's a man of status. And you're just a sad, lonely clerk who wears a costume to feel special." She reached out and flicked one of the buttons on my jacket. "You know, Derek was saying he should legally do something about this, for Mom and Dad's sake, to get you the help you need." "Is that right?" I asked. "He's very protective," Thea smiled, a cruel, tight expression. "He doesn't like liars. He says you're a disgrace to the family name. Honestly, I agree. If I were you, I'd leave before he loses his temper. You know how passionate he gets." Passionate, that was a nice word for volatile. "I'm not leaving, Thea," I said, setting the glass down. "This is my parents' house, and I have every right to be here." "Suit yourself," she shrugged, turning to leave. "But don't say I didn't warn you. Derek has been waiting for a chance to put you in your place. And tonight, With everyone watching, I think he's finally going to do it." She sashayed out of the kitchen, leaving a trail of heavy perfume in her wake. I stood there for a moment, listening to the murmurs from the other room. Thea was right about one thing. Derek was planning something. I could feel it. He wasn't just content with humiliation, he wanted domination. He wanted to prove his authority in the most public way possible. I reached into my pocket and touched the small, encrypted phone I carried for work. I could call for an extraction right now. I could leave, disappear back into the shadows, and let them have their petty little kingdom. But then I thought about the envelope in my car. The one I hadn't planned on opening tonight. The one that contained the preliminary findings of the investigation into the security firm Derek worked for. I hadn't wanted to ruin the anniversary. I had planned to deal with Derek quietly, later, privately. But if they wanted a show, if Derek wanted to play the law enforcement hero. I adjusted my jacket, wincing as the movement pulled at my ribs. I straightened my spine, ignoring the pain. "Okay, brother," I whispered. "Let's see who the real officer is." I walked back out into the hallway. The volume in the living room had risen. Derek was standing in the center of the room, holding court. He had a glass of champagne in one hand and was gesturing wildly with the other. "And that's the thing about integrity," Derek was saying, his voice booming. "You either have it or you don't. Some people have to buy their honor at a costume shop. Real men earn it." He saw me enter the room. The conversation stopped. Derek set his glass down on the coffee table with a purposeful clink. He turned to face me, his face flushed with alcohol and adrenaline. He unclipped the radio from his belt, a walkie-talkie he wore for absolutely no reason at a family dinner, and set it down next to the drink. Then he reached for the handcuffs. "Mia," he announced, his voice taking on a fake, authoritative cadence he must have copied from TV shows. "I tried to be nice. I tried to let you leave with some dignity. But you're disrespecting this family, and you're breaking the law." The room went deathly silent. "What are you doing, Derek?" Mom asked, her voice trembling. "I'm doing what needs to be done," Derek said, unclipping the handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously. "Mia Vance, you are in violation of the Stolen Valor Act of 2013, impersonating a military officer for personal gain." He took a step toward me, holding the cuffs up. "I am placing you under citizen's arrest," he declared, a manic gleam in his eyes. "Get on your knees." "Get on your knees," Derek repeated, his voice shaking slightly, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of a man who believes he is finally, indisputably, the alpha in the room. The room held its breath. My mother was sobbing quietly into a napkin. My father, Richard, looked torn, caught between the spectacle he hated and the perverse satisfaction of seeing his lying daughter finally disciplined. No one moved to stop him. Not one aunt, not one cousin. They were an audience, and Derek was the star performer. I looked at the handcuffs dangling from his fingers. Cheap, nickel-plated steel, probably ordered from the same tactical supply website where he bought his belt. In that fraction of a second, my training kicked in. The emotional hurt, the stinging betrayal of my parents standing idle, was shoved into a mental lockbox. The part of me that was Mia the sister vanished. I was now Major Vance, Senior Special Agent, CID, and I was analyzing a hostile subject. If I resisted physically, I would hurt him. With 3 cracked ribs, I was slower than usual, but Derek had 0 combat training. I could disarm him in 3 seconds, probably break his wrist in the process. But that would play right into his narrative. "See? She's crazy. She's violent. She assaulted me." No, the most damaging thing I could do to Derek right now was absolutely nothing. "You're making a mistake, Derek," I said, my voice dead calm. I didn't kneel. I stood at attention, my posture perfect despite the pain in my side. "If you put those cuffs on me, you are committing a felony, false imprisonment, assault, and interfering with a federal agent." "Federal agent?" Derek laughed, looking around the room for approval. "Hear that? She's still doing it. She's committed to the bit." He lunged forward, grabbing my left wrist. The pain in my ribs spiked as he yanked my arm, but I didn't pull back. I let him do it. I let him twist my arm behind my back, using far more force than was necessary. I heard the click-click-click of the ratchet mechanism tightening against my skin. "Derek, that's too tight," Mom cried out, taking a half-step forward. "Stay back, Mom," Derek barked, panting as he grabbed my other hand. "I'm securing the suspect. This is for her own good. She's clearly unstable." He snapped the second cuff on. My hands were bound behind my back. The metal bit into my wrists, pinching the ulnar nerve. "There," Derek exhaled, wiping sweat from his forehead. He stepped back, hands on his hips, surveying his prisoner. "Now, I'm calling the real police. And when they get here, they're going to take you down to the station, book you for stolen valor, and maybe then you'll get a psych eval." "Go ahead," I said. I stood with my feet shoulder-width apart, staring him directly in the eyes. "Call them." Derek fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling with excitement. He dialed 911, putting it on speaker for maximum dramatic effect. "Yes, emergency," he said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound deep and commanding. "This is Officer. This is Security Supervisor Vance. I have detained a suspect at 42 Maple Drive. We have an individual impersonating a military officer. She is hostile. I have her in custody." He listened for a moment, then smirked at me. Yeah, send a unit, hurry." He hung up and looked at the crowd. "They're on their way. It's over, Mia." The next 10 minutes were an excruciating exercise in patience. Derek paraded around the living room, recounting to the guests, who were now whispering furiously, how he had spotted signs of my deception years ago. Thea was clinging to his arm, looking at me with a mixture of disgust and triumph. "It's the stitching," Derek was explaining to Uncle Bob, pointing vaguely at my uniform. "Real Army uniforms don't look like that, and the ribbons, totally random order." I looked it up. I closed my eyes for a brief second. My rack was perfect. I had spent an hour fixing it before the ceremony. The audacity of his ignorance was almost impressive. But while he gloated, I was working. I was mentally cataloging the room. 32 witnesses. A clear admission of arrest by a non-officer. The physical evidence of the handcuffs on my wrists. And, crucially, Thea's purse sitting on the hallway console table. I could see the edge of a manila envelope sticking out of it, an envelope with the logo of Shield Point Security, Derek's employer. Why did she have work documents at a party? The puzzle pieces clicked together. My investigation into the money laundering ring had flagged Shield Point as a pass-through entity. I knew they were moving illicit funds. I hadn't known Derek was directly involved. I assumed he was just a clueless employee. But seeing Thea guarding that envelope, seeing how desperate they were to discredit me. They weren't just jealous, they were scared. Derek wasn't just trying to humiliate his sister. He was trying to neutralize a threat. Whether he knew I was real or not, he needed me to be a crazy liar so that if I ever asked questions about his sudden influx of cash or his promotion, no one would believe me. He had built a trap for me, but he had forgotten that when you trap a tiger, you'd better make sure the cage is strong enough. I shifted my weight, testing the handcuffs. They were single lock, amateur hour. I could shim them if I wanted to, but I needed the police to see them on me. I needed the visual of a decorated field-grade officer in handcuffs placed by a mall guard. "Derek," I said, breaking my silence. He turned annoyed. "Quiet suspect." "You have the right to remain silent," I said, "but I suggest you start thinking about your defense attorney. Because when that patrol car rolls up, the narrative changes." "You're delusional," he spat. "No," I replied softly, "I'm patient." The red and blue lights flashed through the front bay window, painting the living room in a strobing wash of color. The silence that fell over the party was absolute. This wasn't a game anymore. The law was here. Derek puffed out his chest. Finally, he marched to the front door and threw it open. 2 uniformed officers stepped in. I recognized the lead officer immediately, Sergeant Miller. He was a veteran of the local PD, a good man I had coordinated with on a joint task force regarding drug interdiction 2 years ago. He looked tired, his hand resting casually near his belt until his eyes adjusted to the room. "What's the situation?" Miller asked, scanning the crowd. "Officer," Derek said, stepping forward and extending a hand, which Miller ignored. "I'm Derek Vance, head of security at the mall. I'm the one who called. I have the suspect detained." Derek pointed dramatically at me. I was standing by the fireplace, still in my dress blues, my hands cuffed behind my back. Sergeant Miller looked at Derek, then he looked at me. His eyes widened. He blinked, as if trying to process the visual disconnect. He took a step forward, squinting slightly, then looked back at Derek with an expression of profound confusion. "You detained her?" Miller asked. "Yes, sir," Derek beamed. "She's my sister, unfortunately. She's mentally unstable. She put on this costume and came here claiming to be a major. Violation of the Stolen Valor Act. I performed a citizen's arrest for impersonation and creating a disturbance." Miller didn't respond to Derek. He walked straight past him, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. He looked at the rank on my shoulders, then at the badge hanging around my neck, and finally at my face. The room was deadly silent. Thea was smirking, waiting for the handcuffs to be replaced by police ones. My parents were holding hands, looking down at the floor, unable to watch their daughter being hauled away. "Major Vance," Miller said. His voice wasn't accusing, it was shocked. "Hello, Sergeant Miller," I replied calmly. "I apologize for the disturbance. As you can see, I'm currently incapacitated." Miller's head snapped back to Derek. "You handcuffed a federal agent." The smirk fell off Derek's face. It didn't slide off, it vanished instantly, replaced by a look of slack-jawed confusion. "What? No, officer, you don't understand. It's a costume. She bought it online. She's a logistics clerk." Miller ignored him. He moved behind me. "I'm removing these immediately, ma'am. Are you injured?" 3 cracked ribs from a prior engagement, Sergeant," I said. "The suspect was quite rough during the assault, so I'll likely need a medical check." "Assault," Derek squeaked. Wait a minute, check her ID. She's lying to you. She's good at it. She's been doing it her whole life." Miller unlocked the cuffs. I brought my hands around to the front, rubbing the red welts on my wrists. The relief was immediate, but I didn't let it show. I adjusted my jacket, straightened my tie, and looked at Miller. "Sergeant, I am Major Mia Vance, 701st Military Police Group, CID. My credentials are in my inner pocket. Would you like to verify them?" "That won't be necessary, Major. I remember you from the opioid task force briefing," Miller said, his tone respectful and noticeably rigid. He turned slowly to face Derek. Derek was backing up. No, that's impossible. Mom, Dad, tell him she works in a warehouse." Richard stepped forward, his face pale. "Officer, there must be a mistake. Mia has always had an active imagination. She manages inventory." "Sir," Miller said, his voice cold. "Falsely impersonating a federal officer is a serious crime, but falsely imprisoning one? That's a fast track to federal prison. Your daughter is who she says she is. I've seen her work." Thea let out a small, strangled gasp. She grabbed her purse, the one with the envelope, and started edging toward the hallway. "I wouldn't leave just yet, Thea," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a knife. Thea froze. I turned my attention to Derek. He looked like a child whose magic trick had just failed spectacularly. He was sweating, his eyes darting between me and the police officers. But the website," Derek stammered. "I saw the website." "You saw what you wanted to see, Derek," I said, stepping closer to him. The guests parted like the Red Sea. "You wanted me to be a failure so badly that you committed a felony to prove it. You handcuffed a superior officer in the performance of her duties." I didn't know," Derek whispered. "Ignorance of the law is not a defense," I quoted, looking at Miller. Sergeant, I'd like to file charges, unlawful restraint, assault, and impersonating a peace officer. Me, Derek shouted, his fear turning into aggression. I'm security, I have authority. You have a flashlight and a walkie-talkie, Derek, I said coldly. You are not a police officer. And by announcing yourself as officer to the 911 dispatch, which is recorded, by the way, you crossed a line. This is ridiculous, Derek yelled, looking at our parents. Dad, do something. She's ruining the party. She's ruining everything. Richard looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a dawning, terrible realization. For the first time, he saw the posture, the tone, the command presence. He saw the stranger in his house. Mia, Richard said, his voice cracking. Please, he's your brother. Let's just talk about this. We're past talking, Dad, I said. He wanted the police. He got the police. I turned to Miller. Sergeant, before you take Mr. Vance into custody, there is one more thing, a matter of federal jurisdiction that I need to address. It concerns the reason I was investigating his employer. Derek's face went white. My employer. Shield Point Security, I said, and specifically the envelope in your girlfriend's purse. The room spun into chaos. Derek lunged toward Thea, not to protect her, but to grab the purse. Don't touch it, I barked. The command voice, honed on drill fields and interrogation rooms, froze him in his tracks. Sergeant Miller's hand went to his holster, stepping between Derek and Thea. Sir, back away, now. It's private property, Derek screamed. She can't look at that, you have no warrant. Actually, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a folded document I had kept on me, just in case. I do. This is a subpoena for the financial records of Shield Point Security, specifically regarding their contract with the Regional Mall District. I was going to serve it to your boss on Monday, but since you've provided me with probable cause to believe evidence is being destroyed or concealed on the premises. I looked at Thea. She was trembling, clutching the bag to her chest. Thea, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational, almost gentle tone. The good cop pivot. You're not married to him, you're not implicated in the financials yet, but if you walk out that door with evidence of a crime, you become an accessory after the fact. That's 5 to 10 years. Federal. Thea looked at Derek, who was sweating profusely, his face a mask of panic. Then she looked at me. The choice was obvious. I didn't know, Thea sobbed. He just told me to hold it. He said it was his bonus check details. She thrust the bag at Sergeant Miller, as if it were on fire. Thea, Derek roared, you traitor. Miller handed me the envelope. I opened it. Inside were not bonus checks, but cash, stacks of $100 bills, and a ledger. Aha. ND written ledger. I scanned the page. Kickbacks, I read aloud. Inventory theft. Ghost guards on the payroll. I looked up at Derek. You weren't getting a promotion because you're a good guard, Derek. You were getting a promotion because you were the bagman. No, Derek whispered. The fight had drained out of him. He slumped against the wall. No, I was just following orders. They said it was standard procedure. Standard procedure to launder money through a mall security contract, I asked. Did you really think the Army CID was investigating a logistics clerk? I was investigating you, Derek. Or rather, the people using you. My father, Richard, stumbled forward. He looked aged, defeated. He grabbed Derek's arm. Derek, is this true? Tell me she's lying. Tell me this is just another one of her stories. Derek looked at his father, tears streaming down his face. I just wanted you to be proud of me, Dad. She's always the hero. She's always the one with the medals. I just wanted to be the one in charge for once. By becoming a criminal, I asked. I'm not a criminal, Derek shouted, a last burst of denial. I'm a victim, they used me. Then you can explain that to the judge, I said. I turned to the guests. My aunts, uncles, the neighbors, they were staring at me with a new expression. It wasn't love, necessarily. It was fear. And respect. The logistics clerk had just dismantled the Golden Boy in under 10 minutes without throwing a punch. "Sergeant Miller," I said formally. "Please place the suspect under arrest. Charges include assault, false imprisonment, impersonation of a peace officer, and possession of evidence related to an ongoing RICO investigation." Miller nodded. He pulled his own handcuffs, real, heavy-duty steel, from his belt. "Derek Vance, you are under arrest. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." As Miller spun Derek around, the irony was thick enough to choke on. 10 minutes ago, Derek had been the one clicking cuffs onto my wrists, smiling at his victory. Now, he was being pressed against the wall, his rights being read to him in front of the very audience he had assembled to humiliate me. "Mia," Mom cried out, rushing to me. She grabbed my arm. "Mia, stop this. He's your brother. You can't let them take him. Tell them it was a joke, please." I looked down at my mother. Her grip was tight, desperate. For years, I had craved this, her attention, her emotion. But now that I had it, I realized it was entirely misplaced. She wasn't fighting for me. She was fighting for the image of her perfect family, an image that had never included the real me. "I can't stop it, Mom," I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. "He called the police. He broke the law, and frankly, he's dangerous." "He's your brother," she wailed. "He's a suspect," I corrected. "And right now, I'm not his sister. I'm the major he tried to arrest." I walked over to where Miller was marching a sobbing Derek toward the door. I stood in his path for a moment. Derek looked up at me, his eyes red. "You planned this," he hissed. "You set me up." "I came for dinner, Derek," I said, my voice low so only he could hear. "I came to celebrate Mom and Dad. You're the one who brought the handcuffs. You're the one who wanted a show." I leaned in closer. "You wanted to know who I really was. Now you know." Miller guided him out the door. The flashing lights outside intensified as a second cruiser pulled up to transport him. I stood in the open doorway, the cold night air hitting my face. The pain in my ribs was throbbing, a deep, rhythmic ache. But as I watched my brother being placed into the back of the squad car, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound, exhausting sense of closure. But it wasn't over yet. The ledger in my hand was just the tip of the iceberg. Shield Point Security wasn't just a local scam, it was connected to something bigger, something I had been chasing for 6 months. Derek was just a pawn. I turned back to the room. The party was effectively over. The guests were murmuring, grabbing their coats, eager to escape the awkwardness. But my father was still standing there, staring at me. "You ruined the anniversary," Richard said, his voice hollow. I looked at him, really looked at him. And I realized that no amount of medals, no amount of rank would ever be enough for him. "No, Dad," I said, buttoning my jacket. "I saved you from a federal indictment. Because if I hadn't stopped him tonight, and he had kept laundering that money, you and Mom would have been next on the list of accomplices." I walked past him toward the kitchen to retrieve my cover. "I suggest you call a lawyer for your son. He's going to need a good one." The fluorescent lights of the precinct waiting room buzzed with a low, irritating hum that seemed to synchronize with the throbbing in my side. It was 3:00 a.m. I was sitting on a hard plastic chair, holding a lukewarm cup of vending machine coffee, watching the drama unfold near the front desk. My parents hadn't gone home. They had followed the squad cars to the station, and for the last 4 hours, they had been loudly demanding to see their son, threatening to sue the department, and insisting that this was all a family misunderstanding orchestrated by a jealous sister. I hadn't spoken to them yet. I had been in the back with Sergeant Miller and 2 federal agents who had arrived from the field office, processing the evidence from Thea's bag. The ledger was damning. It wasn't just embezzlement. It was systematic laundering for a group that had been on the terror watch list for 3 years. Derek hadn't just stolen, he had facilitated the movement of funds used to purchase untraceable firearms. I walked out into the lobby. My footsteps echoed on the linoleum. "There she is," my mother shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. She looked disheveled, her makeup running, her anniversary corsage wilted and pinned crookedly to her dress. Mia, tell them to let him go right now. Richard stood up, his face a mask of fury. You have gone too far, Mia. Having your brother arrested at our anniversary? Do you have any idea the humiliation you've caused us? Mr. Henderson was asking if we needed a bail bondsman. A bondsman, Mia. You should take his number, Dad, I said, my voice raspy from exhaustion. You're going to need him. Although, for federal charges, bail is usually denied. Federal charges? Richard scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Stop with the drama. He's a security guard. He probably just mishandled some paperwork. You're blowing this up to punish us for being proud of him. A small crowd had gathered, officers on break, a few people waiting to file reports, and the desk sergeant. The public nature of this confrontation was unavoidable. My parents were making sure of that. I'm not doing this to punish you, I said, stepping closer. I'm doing this because he's a criminal, and you need to stop enabling him before you get dragged down with him. He is a good boy, Mom cried, grabbing the lapels of my dress uniform, her fingers digging into the fabric. He is a protector, just like you pretend to be. I gently but firmly removed her hands. I don't pretend, Mom, and tonight, you're going to see exactly what your good boy has been doing. I signaled to Sergeant Miller, who was standing by the door to the squad room. He nodded and brought out a tablet. I didn't want to do this here, I said to the room, my voice steady. But since you refuse to listen to the law, maybe you'll listen to the evidence. I took the tablet. This, I said, swiping to a surveillance photo, is Derek 3 weeks ago. He's meeting with a man named Viktor Volkov behind the mall loading docks. Richard squinted at the screen. So, he's doing his job, talking to vendors. Volkov isn't a vendor, Dad. He's a broker for illegal firearms, I explained, swiping to the next image. And this is Derek accepting a brown paper bag, the same type of bag we found in his apartment an hour ago during the execution of a search warrant. You searched his apartment, Mom gasped. You violated his privacy. We found $40,000 in cash hidden in his mattress, Mom, I said, my voice hardening. And we found the blueprints. Blueprints? Richard asked, his voice wavering for the first time. Blueprints for the mall's ventilation system and emergency exits, I said. Marked with bypass codes. He sold the security protocols, Dad. He sold the safety of every person who shops there, families, kids, teenagers, to a group planning an active shooter event. The silence that slammed into the room was absolute. The buzzing of the lights seemed to vanish. The officers in the background stopped moving. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. She staggered back, hitting the edge of the seating area. No, that's not. He wouldn't. He protects people. He sold them out for cash, I said brutally. He didn't care who got hurt. He just wanted the money to buy the truck, to buy the suits, to impress you. He wanted to play the big shot so badly that he became a traitor. You're lying, Richard whispered, but the conviction was gone. He looked at the photo of Derek shaking hands with the arms dealer. He looked at the timestamp. I wish I was, I said softly. I really wish I was just a jealous sister making up stories. But I'm not. I'm the senior special agent who just stopped your son from being an accessory to mass murder. At that moment, the heavy steel door to the holding cells opened. 2 officers escorted Derek out. He was in an orange jumpsuit now, stripped of his fake tactical gear, his cheap suit, and his dignity. He was shackled at the wrists and ankles, shuffling toward the transport van that would take him to the federal detention center. He looked up and saw us. He saw the photos on the tablet I was Elding. Mom, Dad, Derek's voice was small, broken. I can fix it. I just need a lawyer. Tell them I was undercover. Tell them I was working with the police. Richard stared at his son. He looked at the shackles. He looked at me, standing tall in my legitimate uniform, holding the evidence of a averted tragedy. The realization hit Richard like a physical blow. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the counter to stay upright. The delusion he had fed for 30 years, the myth of Derek the hero, Mia the failure, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "You weren't undercover," Richard said, his voice trembling with a rage I had never heard before. You sold the mall where we take your nieces." "Dad, I needed the money," Derek whined. "You said you wanted me to be successful. You said you were tired of me being a rent-a-cop." "I didn't tell you to sell innocent people out," Richard roared, lunging forward. Sergeant Miller had to step in, holding my father back. "Take him away," I ordered quietly. The officers guided Derek out the glass doors. He was crying, screaming for his mother, blaming everyone but himself. My mother collapsed onto the plastic chairs, sobbing uncontrollably. But this time, she wasn't crying for her poor, victimized son. She was crying for the monster she had coddled. I stood over them, feeling a strange lightness. The weight of their judgment, which I had carried on my shoulders for decades, had evaporated. "I'm going back to the hotel," I said. "I have a briefing in 4 hours. I suggest you go home and get some sleep. The arraignment is at 10:00 a.m. Don't bother hiring a lawyer. The court will appoint one. He's going to need a public defender who specializes in plea deals for domestic terrorism." I turned to leave, my combat boots squeaking slightly on the floor. "Mia," Richard called out. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. We didn't know," he stammered. "We thought." "I know what you thought," I said, looking at my reflection in the glass door. "I saw the major. I saw the survivor. You thought I wasn't enough. You were wrong." I pushed the door open and walked out into the cool night air. 6 months later. The courtroom was quiet, save for the scratching of the stenographer's machine. I sat in the back row, wearing a civilian suit. I didn't need the uniform today. The judge knew who I was. The prosecutor knew who I was. And most importantly, I knew who I was. Derek stood before the bench. He looked thinner, paler. The swagger was gone, replaced by a permanent hunch, as if he were trying to make himself smaller. He had taken the deal. In exchange for testifying against Volkov and the rest of the Shield Point laundering ring, the federal prosecutor had dropped the accessory to terrorism charges down to grand larceny, fraud, and providing material support to a criminal enterprise. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, peering over her glasses, "you have admitted to betraying the trust of your employer and your community for personal gain. Your actions could have resulted in catastrophic loss of life. It is only due to the diligent work of the Army CID and local law enforcement that this tragedy was prevented." Derek nodded, staring at the floor. "I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison," the judge declared, "with eligibility for parole after 8 years. The gavel banged. It was a sound of finality. I watched as the marshals led him away. He didn't look back at the gallery. He didn't look for our parents. They were sitting 2 rows in front of me. Richard and Mom holding hands, their heads bowed. They looked 10 years older than they had at the anniversary party. The scandal had rocked their small social circle. The neighbors who had sneered at my uniform were now giving interviews to the local paper about how they always knew Derek was trouble. The hypocrisy would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. As the courtroom cleared, I stood up to leave. I had a flight to catch. I had been reassigned to a task force in Germany, a promotion, and a move I had been wanting for years. "Mia." I paused in the aisle. Richard and Mom were standing there. They looked hesitant, like strangers approaching a celebrity. "Hello," I said politely. "He got 12 years, Mom whispered, wiping her eyes. 12 years, he'll be 50 when he gets out." "He's lucky," I said. "If the attack had happened, he would be facing the death penalty or life without parole. He got off easy." Richard nodded slowly. He looked at me, really looked at me, with a mixture of shame and awe. "We read the report, the one the lawyer gave us. We saw your service record, the things you did in Afghanistan." "I know," I said. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why did you let us treat you like a clerk?" I sighed. It was the question I had asked myself 1,000 times. "Because I wanted you to love me for me, Dad, not F." or the rank, not for the medals. I wanted to be enough as just your daughter. But it turns out, unless I was Derek, I was never going to be enough. That's not true, Mom protested weakly. It is, I said with zero malice, just facts. And that's okay, I've made my peace with it. I have a family, Mom. They wear the same uniform I do. They have my back. They don't need me to pretend to be something I'm not. I checked my watch. I have to go. My flight leaves in 2 hours. Will you come home for Christmas? Mom asked, a desperate note of hope in her voice. I looked at them. I saw the regret in their eyes, the desperate need for absolution. If this were a movie, I would hug them. We would cry. I would promise to visit. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life. And I was done being the backup plan, the safety net, the punching bag they returned to when their golden child failed. I don't think so, I said gently. I'll be in Germany, but I'll send a postcard. I walked past them, down the aisle of the courtroom, and out the heavy double doors. The sun was shining outside, bright and blinding. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't smell of old resentments or hidden secrets. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my unit commander. Wheels up in 3 hours, beers on me when we land. I smiled, unlocked my rental car, and tossed my bag in the passenger seat. I didn't look back at the courthouse. I put the car in drive and pulled out into traffic, merging seamlessly into the flow of the world, finally, fully free.